Retired U.S. Army Major John Spencer, an expert on urban warfare, thank you so much for joining us today. So 1 year since Russia's President Vladimir Putin launched his country's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, how do you see the current situation on the front lines?
Well, I definitely think that Putin gambled and lost. After a year, he has very little to show for it. The front lines is still precarious and dangerous for Ukraine, but the path for Russia to achieve any of the goals, whether it's to take all the Donbass or all of the south of Ukraine, is unachievable, especially with the allies that Ukraine has to support its defense of its territories. Yes, we think there's a coming offensive happening soon from both sides, and we don't know really who's going to launch first because there's lots of fighting still to be done, but Putin's already lost this war a long time ago.
You spent time in Ukraine during the war. Can you describe what you found? Tell me about the dynamics on the Ukrainian fighting side, because on one hand you have the actual military with their goals and objectives alongside the plain civilians who took up arms to defend their homes. How this work together?
And really, as I traveled around Ukraine, what really surprised me was that this wasn't a fight between the Russian military and the Ukrainian military. This was a fight for all of Ukraine by all Ukrainians. Every person I met was actively engaged in resistance or defending their right to be free. And it was an overwhelming feeling that as I've traveled the world and studied war all over the world, I've never felt that, where everybody was fighting for their freedom. And you could feel it. Of course, I observed it, and I met so many people who had came out old and young to fight Russia for their own freedoms and not to live under the evil Russian rule. It was really, it really touched me when I visited.
In a recent interview, you were quoted in saying, "Professionals talk logistics, whereas amateurs talk tactics." Can you explain what exactly you meant?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very old quote from going back to Napoleon, if not before that, fighting is important to talk about, but the fighting doesn't happen without the logistics and the supplies, the ammunition, the food, and the fuel. And Russia was showing the world that in February of 2022, when it entered and his trucks couldn't get their fuel and they couldn't move, because there's no fighting if you don't have that logistics and that secure logistic lines behind you. And we've seen this in the war so far, where Ukraine has used a superior level of fighting and where it attacks the supplies behind the Russian formations. And in places like Kherson, there wasn't a fight because the logistic support to the Russian soldiers was gone. And soldiers don't fight very well when they know they don't have food coming or more ammunition coming. So that's why we say, even from an entire country level war all the way down to the individual soldiers, amateurs talk tactics and professionals talk logistics, supplies.
Behmout, maybe a good example of urban warfare. Can you explain the specifics of such a fight, and why is this town so important for the Ukrainians?
Sure. I mean, Bakhmut is a unique urban fight, unlike the Battle of Kiev, unlike Mariupol. Each one of these urban battles are different, but they have unique features. And why urban warfare is so hard is that a defender can turn the urban terrain into a very strong defensive position because of the unique features of concrete and steel and underground structures. And this is what we've seen the Ukrainians do in Bakhmut to allow the Russians to continue to send wave and wave of Wagner prisoners and rapists, or just formations against those defensive urban positions, and die. And that's what we've seen. I mean, Bakhmut's kind of unique because it really doesn't serve a tactical reason to have such killing and such a fight over that piece of ground, where somewhere like Severodonetsk and Izum and these places that are gates to logistical hubs, back to logistics like railway stations and major road intersections. But Bakhmut is showing again that the urban terrain is the most complex, and Ukrainians have again shown their skill to defend it as long as they need, always leave a way out. But if the Russians want to keep killing themselves trying to take it, then there's another quote where you just don't ever interrupt your enemy when he's making his mistakes.
What will it take to tip the scale in this war from both sides? How much longer will this war drag on? And also, do you think it's realistic for Ukraine to retake all its territory that was taken by Russia?
So I'll take the easy one first. So I do think it's realistic that Ukraine takes all of its territories, and they're internationally recognized borders by the world's 1991 borders. Those are illegally occupied areas that Ukraine does have the capability, as long as it maintains the overwhelming support of the West and over 50 countries, not just the United States. Of course, the United States is important. That's what they need. They don't have a shortage in will to fight, a shortage in fighters. They need to keep the supplies flowing as much as possible that they've been promised or are receiving. In order for Russia to continue, they do have shortages in lots of things. Maybe not in forcing people to the front lines, but even when they tried to do that, they lost more men fleeing the country than they could mobilize to fight in Ukraine. But we know that they are willing to sacrifice tens of thousands more. It's really they who decide when this ends. It's when does Russia, as in the people and the people around Putin, decide enough is enough, that they're not going to achieve, and it's really sunk cost. They're just going to keep killing Russian citizens and destroying the Russian state, which is what Putin has done for the last year on all forms of power, diplomatic, information, military, and economic. He's destroying the Russian state for goals that he cannot achieve in Ukraine at all because of Ukraine's will to fight and its overwhelming support of the world, that what Russia is doing is not right.
I'd like to talk to you about the Russian failure to capture the capital, Kiev. What were the key factors in defending the capital, and how important was it for the Ukrainians to hold their ground there?
If Kiev would have fell in February, March, April of 2022, this war would have ended. Yes, Ukraine would continue fighting, and Russia would have faced the greatest insurgency known to man, but the political objective of Russia to remove the Ukrainian government and instill a puppet one would have been achieved. All Russia had to do was penetrate Kiev and raise the Russian flag on top of the capital, maybe kill President Zelensky, but they failed. They failed to comprehend the requirements it would take to take a capital city of millions of people where the people resisted. Most people agree that that's what the world underestimated in Ukraine's will to fight. I mean, there were only a few thousand Ukrainian militaries in the capital city when Russia attacked. And Russia came with a very formidable force. But once they failed to take Hostomel Airport, once the Ukrainians started blocking all the roads, then they just didn't have what they needed to take the capital city. And when you have tens of thousands of Ukrainian citizens now armed and fighting just for a single block, it would have taken hundreds of thousands of Russians to take the capital city. But it was such a vital moment in this war, and the Battle of Kiev saved Ukraine. Not saying that the battles of Chernihiv and the battles of Sumy and all these weren't contributing factors, but that was the moment in which Ukraine saved itself by everybody coming out to fight.
John Spencer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.